Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmeen. Now we're at the 19th lesson, as you can see, we're at as-Saaleheen. We're at the 400th something hadith, which is, I think, about a quarter of the book nearly, alhamdulillah. So we're getting along very well, alhamdulillah. Now we have 3 chapters that I wanted to select for today's lesson. Let me just plug this in. Chapter of khawf, the chapter of raja, and the chapter of virtues of having raja. And I'm pretty sure you've heard these terminologies before, and most of them are taken from this book that we've got here, Thalathatul Usul, which I'm pretty sure many people are familiar with. And in that book, basically this book is talking about the rights of 3 usul. One asal is your connection between you and your Lord. The second asal is the connection between you and your religion, and the third one is the connection between you and your Prophet. And the first one, obviously, he's doing it in sense of priority. He's talking about the connection that you have with your Lord, and he talks about certain things which are a right of Allah alone. And after talking about these rights of Allah alone, in brackets here we put down worshipping him alone, the author then begins to give examples of certain rights that are only for Allah. And the first one that he talked about was dua. And dua in the general sense and dua in the specific sense. Dua in the general sense means any act of worship. So linguistically, as-salat is dua as well. And it comprises of, supplicating and praising, etc. And like we've said before also in the Hisnul Muslim class, that dua can be categorized into 2 types, dua mas'ala and dua ibadah. And dua mas'ala is the normal dua that we make, oh Allah, help me pass my exams, etc. And dua ibadah, which is known today as dhikr, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, those kind of things. So the author begins by talking about these rights that belong to Allah alone, and the biggest of them is dua, and dua in its general sense and its specific sense. But then after that, he talks about fear. And khawf, or the word fear in the Quran and the Sunnah, comes in many different ways, as in a different word has been used to refer to fear in different contexts. And we're going to look at the definition for that. So that's why I've put here in brackets, fear of the unseen. Because when we say khawf in the Arabic language, it refers to fear of the unseen, of something that you don't know what's going to happen as a consequence in the future. And this is from the sunnah of mankind, to have this kind of khawf. So Imam an-Nawawi here in the beginning of the book talks about how many people had been told to go back to Allah and have a fear of their consequence and rectify their situation before punishment comes. So now here we have in Surah Baqarah, وَإِيَّايَ فَارْهَبُونَ, to me alone, you should have that level of fear and connection. Inna batsha rabbika lashadid. Again, from the sunnah of mankind, those people who didn't have that fear, the consequence was very, very severe. And here we have this long ayah in Surah Hud, وَكَذَلِكَ أَخْذُ رَبِّكَ إِذَا أَخْذُ الْقُرَى وَهِيَ ظَالِمَةٌ إِنَّ أَخْذَهُ عَلِيمٌ شَدِيدٌ. That when He wants to take a group of people, in its origin, Allah wants us to come back and fear Him. Allah doesn't want to punish us. The purpose of our creation is not that we are punished. It's not that we are gaining the anger of Allah. The purpose of our creation is to enter Jannah. And Allah is much more patient than anyone, including ourselves, when it comes to that. Because we sin by day and night, but Allah remains patient. And if He wanted to, He could take us at any moment due to any kind of sin and negligence. And there's a hadith in this regard also. The Prophet ﷺ said that if Allah was to punish everyone on earth in one go, take them all away, that would be from His justice. And He wouldn't be wronging us in the slightest by doing that. But He is a sabur, and He is a halim, and He wants to have patience, and He wants to be forbearing with us. But when the anger of Allah comes, when the proof against ourselves has been established because of the shield of khawf has been damaged so much so that it doesn't exist anymore, then inna akhdahu alimun shadid, then the taking of Allah is painful and it's stern. Inna fi dhalika al-ayah liman khafa al-adhab al-akhirah. And now here we're talking about khawf, and in this is an ayah for those people from the first of mankind to the last of mankind, when Allah has taken nations before us and continues to punish people. We can look at the world, we can inspect the situation that's happening globally even now. Some people are being tested in a way that other people aren't being tested. All of this is an ayah, all of this is a sign and a reminder for those people who have khawf and fear of consequences in the future. Adhab al-akhirah. ذَلِكَ يَوْمٌ مَجْمُوعٌ لَهُ النَّاسُ وَذَلِكَ يَوْمٌ مَشْهُودٌ. That is the day when everyone will be gathered, and on that day you will have people who will be happy and those people will be sad. The Imam al-Nawawi brings more ayat, and what we can possibly gain from these next two ayat is that it is a pillar of worship. So if somebody asks you what is worship, how would you answer that question? Somebody who doesn't know what worship is, maybe Muslim, maybe non-Muslim, what's the answer to that question? We do it every single day. We keep telling everyone to do it. We keep reminding ourselves and our family members to do it. It's something very important. The basic definition given to worship by many of the ulama is that you do something that is beloved to Allah. That is worship. So us sitting here is worship, if we have the right intention. Going to buy milk for your family is worship, if you have the right intention. You playing and socializing with your friends could be an act of worship if you have the right intention. And if you're obviously following the guidelines of the Sharia, that is worship. And that's what Allah wants from us. So we've talked about this over and over again. And one of the biggest things that we find people not understanding correctly and falling short on, unfortunately, also, which is that they feel that Islam is very strict and very regressive in the sense that it doesn't allow for people to have enjoyment. Even education, even on a social level, they just think that you have to be in a state of worship all the time, and it's very, very strict, and there's no pleasure, and you have to live a life of poverty and asceticism, where you're not connected to the dunya, so you're not allowed to have a nice car, wear nice clothes. All of those things are misconceptions. It is categorically not true. Worship is anything that you do with the right intention. So you can go out and buy a really nice car, and that could be worship if you've got ikhlas in it, and if it's through halal means, and you are using that car to affirm the blessings of Allah and to show the blessings of Allah. And that part of that blessing, that Allah has given me this nice car, I'm going to use it to uphold the ties of kinship. I'm going to use it to go get the groceries for the sake of Allah, so my family will have nourishment, and that will enable them to give more shukr. This is worship. Now that's the definition of worship, but what are the components of worship? What does worship comprise of? Now the ulama have said, if somebody's asked you what is worship, that's the definition, but when does worship become for other than Allah? Now we're talking about the components. So now I want to do something to make somebody else happy. That could possibly be an act of worship. So the ulama have said worship has 4, maybe 5 components. Hope, fear, love, submission, khudu, and the 5th one, if you were to add it, tawakkul. Many of the ulama have just added that 4, and the 5th one is there. So there is no act of worship that you could possibly ever do which won't have one of these 5 components. It will have either all of them or one of them. And these are the things that need to be singled out to Allah alone. And here we are going to talk about today 2 of the most important ones of them. And these 2 are opposites if you think about it. Hope and fear. Hope in what and fear of what? The complete opposite. وَيُحَذِّرُكُمُ اللَّهُ نَفْسَهُ. Allah is warning you against Himself. Despite Him being Rahman, despite Him creating us without us, deserving a place in Jannah, Allah is telling us, and the generosity is, multiplied on a daily basis. Despite that, Allah says with a stern warning, He is warning you against Himself. يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ وَصَاحِبِهِ. On that day, you will flee from everyone that you know and that is beloved to you. So what we learn from this is that if you don't understand what worship is, and if you don't know the components of worship, then it's very easy for us not to understand what Allah wants from us. Allah is telling us, take a warning from Allah against Himself. Understand these 4 points very, very carefully and implement them precisely. Hope, fear, love and submission. And don't get distracted by anything. Not even the closest family member, because nobody else deserves that. It's a right that belongs only to Allah. But that connection with the people that you love, and the things that you love, your car, your house, your phone, your clothes, and all of those kind of things, can actually be utilized to attain these things here. So hope and fear and love and submission, tawakkul, is either a make or break. You can have a phone and you can use that as ibadah, but that if you understand the concept of hope and love and fear and submission, etc. But if you don't understand that, then it's very, very easy for you to use this thing in other than worship. And it could even end up being the object of worship. It's quite possible. What's the recompense of fear? Ya ayyuhan nas taqu rabbakum inna zalzalata as-saa'ati shay'un adheem. Allah says in the beginning of Surah Hajj, O mankind, fear your Lord. Be conscious of Him, because the shaking, the earthquake that will happen, the shaking of the earth on the Day of Judgment is something which is formidable. يَوْمَ تَرَوْنَهَا, well, on that day you will see people who are dependent on other people completely ignoring them and avoiding them. Why? Because, and you will see people as if they are intoxicated, but they're not intoxicated. Why? Because the intensity of the fear on that day. وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبَّهُ جَنَّتَانِ. Whoever fears their Lord, then he will have 2 Jannahs. And the rest of the surah explains that there are وَمِن دُونِهِمَا جَنَّتَانِ. So in actual fact, this ayah is talking about 2, but Allah from His generosity, He says in another ayah, we'll give you 2, but we'll increase the 2. We'll give you 4. And the description in Surah Rahman of those 4 Jannats that you will get if you have what? Khawf. Allah doesn't say وَلِمَنْ حَبَّهُ حَبَّ رَبَّهُ جَنَّتَانِ or something like that. You know, Allah is talking specifically here about khawf. Now khawf here doesn't necessarily mean you just fear and that's it. There is no other connection between love and hope and submission and tawakkul and those kind of things. That doesn't necessarily mean that these components of worship is not there, but here it's been specified. Because that khawf will then help you engage in the other aspects and the other components that you need to be successful and get those 4 Jannat. In Surah At-Tur, Allah talks about those people who enter Jannah. May Allah make us of them. Once people enter Jannah, وَأَقْبَلَ بَعْدُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْدٍ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ. They will turn to one another, their family members, their friends, and they will ask one another, قَالُوا إِنَّا كُنَّا قَبْلُ فِي أَهْلِنَا مُشْفِقِينَ. We were used to be with our families, and the reason why we are only here is because whilst we were in the dunya, we used to remind one another, our friends, our family, about the fear that we have of the consequences of our dunya and akhirah. Mushfiqeen is another way of saying that you have a level of fear. So once they enter Jannah, they will say, don't you remember how we used to be in the dunya? إِنَّا كُنَّا قَبْلُ فِي أَهْلِنَا مُشْفِقِينَ. Whilst we used to be with our friends and our families, we used to be in this constant state of fear, of not knowing what's going to happen to us. And as a result, what will happen? فَمَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا وَوَقَانَا عَذَابَ السَّمُومِ. And this is a conversation that people will have in Jannah when they enter. And from the virtue of Allah, this conversation continues. From the virtue of Allah upon us, Allah has saved us from a tormenting and a pitchful, a deep punishment. إِنَّا كُنَّا مِن قَبْلُ نَدْعُوهُ إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْبَرُّ الرَّحِيمُ. We used to supplicate to Him, we used to worship Him, and He is the generous and He is the compassionate. And He is given through His compassion and His generosity and His mercy as in exchange for what? Your khawf. And Imam Nawawi says that, and there are many ayat which talk about the concept of khawf and the concept of all 4 of these components of worship. And there are many texts that prove that. So before we go into the hadith, what is fear? What is khawf? All of these ayat teach us that khawf is obviously very important, but they also teach us that there are different types of fear. And we just talked about that a minute ago. But Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, classes them into 4 different types. Khawf, wajl, khashya, and rahbah. And these are 4, you will find them, I'm pretty sure you'll find them always translated as fear. So if you read in an English translation of the Quran or maybe even hadith, these words are being used to refer to fear, but they mean different things. They have a definition which is different to one another. So khawf basically means that a person has a fear of something about the future. He doesn't know what's going to happen to him in the future. And what that means then is it drives him to act now or to refrain, because of a consequence that he will know that will happen either in the future. He doesn't know what's going to happen, but that khawf is a preventer. Wajil is the same as above, so it helps a person to do an action, or it refrains him from doing an action, but this happens right now. So this happens right now. So in the dunya, he will think, okay, well if I do this, an uquba will come to me in the dunya, so I'm not going to do that. So now khawf, akhirah, wajil, right now. Khashya, translated as khawf as well, or translated as fear, excuse me. A person having a level of fear of Allah and the consequences of his actions. So it's similar to what we've seen before with fear. However, khashya is the highest one. So maybe you should have put that as 4, but khashya is the highest one. Reason why? Because khashya is based on certainty and firm knowledge. So when you prevent yourself, or when you act upon something, you know fully well what the consequences of those things are. So now, if I was to pray 5 times a day, I know Allah will give me 50 for that. So that's going to push me forward. This is an aspect of khashya that you have in your life. And the more you have of that, the more khashya you have. The more ilm and the more action you have, the more khashya you will have. And rahbah is a general sense of fear of punishment. It's not specified to time, unlike these, or action, or ilm, just a general sense of fear. That I know my Lord is overpowerful, and I know my Lord, His punishment is severe, and this will stop me. This will stop me from doing anything generally in my life. So now we have 4 different uses of the word fear of Allah, but their meanings and their contexts are different. Why is this important? Ibn al-Qayyim again, rahimahullah, in a separate place, he says, if a person worships with Allah alone, with love, so he says, the only reason why I'm worshipping Allah is I love Him. That's the only reason. He says, such a person is a heretic. He's a zindiq. He's a mubtadi', as you probably use today. He's a person who has deviated from the correct way. If he says, I will worship only Allah based on fear alone, this has become a huge problem with the Muslim ummah today. And this is what I believe has created extremism also. And this is what Ibn al-Qayyim is saying also. When you fear, when it's just about fear, you'll become extreme. You will leave tawakkul, you will leave taking the asbab, you will leave all of those things. You will adopt name calling, you will adopt casting people into nifaq and kufr and shirk and to the hellfire, etc. Because of that level of fear that you have for yourself, and you feel that other people don't have that level of fear, therefore that person must be a person of the fire. You become extreme. If you have love alone, innovator. If you have fear alone, khariji, an extreme person. If you say, I have hope alone. So now look at what Ibn al-Qayyim is saying here. You have 4 components. He just talked about 3. If you say you have only love, that's a problem. If you say you have only fear, that's a problem. If you say you have only hope, that's a problem. Is anybody ever going to say to you, don't have hope in Allah? If you don't have hope in Allah, you don't know what worship is. We just talked about that. If you don't have love in Allah, you don't know what worship is. If you don't have fear in Allah, you don't know what worship is. If you don't have tawakkul in Allah, you don't know how worship is. If you completely remove these and direct them to somebody other than Allah, it's kufr and shirk. So look how delicate this situation is. Look how difficult it actually is. I mean, it might be easy for us to put it on paper and say, well, actually I love Allah and I have fear of Him. But how difficult might it actually be to understand and comprehend and implement? The Shaykh is now saying, if those people have only hope in Allah, then that person will become a murji. What's a murji? A murji is basically somebody who detaches iman from amal And the repercussion of that is that person will end up dismantling the religion without even knowing it, or maybe even knowing it. So then he will say, for example, I don't need to pray. Allah knows what's in my heart, and I have hope that He will forgive me. I don't need to have a beard. I don't need to wear a hijab. I can engage in riba. I can drink alcohol because I believe in a merciful Lord. And He's not going to punish me for those things. That's a false sense of hope. Ibn al-Qayyim is saying, if you don't understand these components well, and if you don't proportionate these components correctly, then you will not be a mu'min. If he worships Allah with love, hope and fear in a balanced manner, with understanding those definitions, then, only then, is he a mu'min. So now we can see the importance of fear. And hope and love and all those other things as well. We're going to look at hope as the next chapter, but fear specifically here in this chapter. Types of khawf. What is khawf? Let's leave number 4 there. What is khawf? And again, this is taken from the book that we talked about in the beginning of the lecture. Khawf can actually be shirk. How can khawf be shirk? How can your level of fear of something can make that act of fear become an act of worship that is directed other than Allah? I mean, how can that ever possibly happen? Hypothetically maybe, but it's more than hypothetical. The ulama have said that khawf, or fear of something other than Allah, becomes an act of worship that you are directing either more to other than Allah or equally to Allah and that other thing, that would take you outside the fold of Islam, because it's an act of shirk. And this is when you fear other than Allah for love or hope and submission and tawakkul. So you have more fear in something other than Allah or equal to Allah. Khawf, having a fear of something, can also be haram. And this is when a person stops practicing aspects of his religion, fearing retribution from the creation, which is not realistic. And I have to put this in brackets here, even though it's not in the Arabic. If there is a realistic sense of fear, then Allah gives you a rukhsah. There's always a rukhsah. There's always a dispensation. I was going to say concession, same sort of thing. There's always a rukhsah. There's always a way out. There's always a leeway. So, we're not talking about a person fearing and taking that rukhsah. We're not talking about that. This is when a person says, look, I'm not going to become a person who prays. I'm going to leave aspects of the religion because I fear what will happen to me, what other people will do. This differs from taking the rukhsah. This differs from you taking the reality into consideration. And it also differs from wisdom and ijtihad. So if a person, for example, sacrifices in practicing an aspect of Islam because there is a wisdom behind it, that is not fair. You can't say that person is no longer a mu'min, or he's fallen into an act of which is haram or something like that. There may be a wisdom, there may be ijtihad behind it. So I had to put that in brackets because that is very important in understanding point number 2. And point number 3, there could be a natural sense of fear. A natural sense of fear. So some people are scared of spiders, or if you see a lion, a natural sense of fear. That doesn't necessarily mean you are targeting or you're giving that lion or that spider your devotion in worship. It's just a natural sense of fear. And point number 4, which I forgot to mention, which is iman and tawheed. And these are the things that we've been talking about. When you when you understand what worship is, and you have those components of worship where it's love and fear, and all ultimate love and fear and hope and submission goes back to Allah. That's when you become a believer. So now we have some hadith where Imam al-Nawawi is talking about some of these narrations that he has collected when it comes to fear. Khawf in the dunya, for example, is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud reported that the Prophet ﷺ, the receiver of truth, Sadiq al-Masduq, informed us that when you are created, you go through a period of not existing, even though you are conceived in the womb for 40 days. Then after that, you go through a change of being a nutfa to an alaqa and a mudgha, etc. But then an angel comes down with your soul and it breathes it into the womb of the mother. And it writes down 4 things as it is commanded to by Allah. Whether the person will be happy or not, its lifespan, its rizq, and where they will be ending up in the Akhirah, whether it's in Jannah or whether it's in Jahannam. The point that we learn from this hadith is that it's very, very important for us to understand what Iman is and our purpose in life. Now, our purpose in life, like we said before, the whole reason why you've been created is to enter Jannah. That's what Allah wants from us. Some people don't have that decreed for them, but you can't obviously use that as a decree and say, that's what Allah's decreed and that's it, I'm not going to end up going into Jannah and I can continue living my life of desires. But this hadith is very, very important because it's teaching us now that you have a purpose in life. That purpose has already been ordained, but now you have to make it a hujjah for yourself. So when you come on Yawm al-Qiyamah, that level of hope and fear and love and submission is going to be a proof for you, not against you. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, your heart and your life, and talking about your purpose of creation, your heart and your life depends on three things. Your soul, your existence, and every aspect of your life which follows on from your existence and your soul, the whole reason why you exist, has three parts to it. If it is strong, then your heart and your life will be strong and it will have tranquility and it will have a level of submission and love and hope and all those things that we've been talking about. And if it lacks, then it lacks accordingly. The lesser, the lesser. And if it is non-existent, then it's non-existent. What are those three things? What are those three ingredients that you need to have a life of Iman in your soul and have goodness in your dunyawi life? You need to have khawf. You need to have raja and you need to have mahabba. And these three things that we've just talked about are the components of worship. A fear of punishment in the unseen, of consequence, you don't know what's going to happen. Raja, a hope in positive recompense in the unseen, and having a love of Allah in the dunya, and seeking to make Him happy whilst you are here, once you have that ability to do so. If the heart, he continues now, if the heart contradicts one or more of these things, then betterment will be compromised because their Iman will then become weak. So if a person is not strong in his khawf and he has more raja, what happens? He ends up becoming a person who becomes lazy. Yeah, I'll pray once a week or twice a week or maybe once a day and inshallah Allah will forgive me. Now his raja has become stronger than his khawf. And his raja has become stronger maybe than his khawf and his mahabba. This is just one example. Then you can also have the other example of the Khawarij and the Daesh and those kind of people. All their thinking is about how to kill people and how to eradicate people and to label people, etc. Because their khawf is too excessive. When you talk to them, like, Akhi, listen, it's possible that Allah guides people by just having sadaqah and being nice to them and being charitable and showing them the beauty of Islam. No, they're going to reject all of that. Because there is no hope. It has to be fear. So when you don't have that, your heart then and your life is dictated by that. And when your heart and your understanding and your iman and your soul and your life as a lifestyle doesn't have that correct understanding, then it will have a weakness of iman. And that weakness of iman will then compromise the amount of tranquility that you have in the dunya. What does this all mean? What this means is we need to have consciousness of the consequence that of the consequence and the purpose of our life, really. As in, we need to realize that we, again, following on from this hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, that we have been created for the purpose of entering into Jannah. Everything has already been ordained and pre-decreed. We need to act right now as a consequence on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So when we come on Yawm al-Qiyamah, we can speak to Allah and we can have a good weighing and reckoning when we meet Allah. Because if we don't have that consequence now, then how will you be able to answer on Yawm al-Qiyamah? In this context, we are talking about sins and desires. The more a person knows his Lord and his religion, the more he will be aware and have knowledge of those consequences. And if a person doesn't know who his Lord is and what his religion wants from him, then he's not going to have much of that consequence in his life. So for example, I had a person the other day and he was trying to remind people about coming back and making tawbah, and he's talking to a group of people who didn't really seem practicing. And his argument is that you have been created and you're going to die soon and you don't know when you're going to die, so prepare for it. I mean, that's good. It's a very good argument. It's sound. So, but his argument was then after that was to say, well, the way that you can then prepare is to be a good human being. Be good to yourself, be good to your family members, be good to your neighbors, be good to people in society. Again, I don't think you can pick any fault in that, but there is a fault. There's an intrinsic fault. What's the fault? That a person has not connected this person to khawf, or raja, or mahabba, or submission. Sorry, I'm using the Arabic, but I'm sure you're probably familiar with it. Consequence. Consequence is very, very important, because that's what connects you with Allah in the dunya, and then that's what gives you a hujjah and a proof on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Therefore, if you have ilm of who Allah is and what He wants from you, that will then create action. When you have action, then you will have these components which make up worship. And if you have that, like Ibn Taymiyyah, as I was just saying a minute ago, when you have these things, then you will have betterment in your life, you have tranquility in your life, you'll have meaning in your life. Hadith 397, hell will be brought forward on the Day of Judgment with 70,000 bridles. So now they will be dragging 70,000, and every bridle or every rope that is dragging the hellfire along will have 70,000 angels pulling it. Khawf. The more ilm you have of the consequence, of the unseen, of Allah and His ability and what He wants from us, the more that will increase. The more that will increase in khawf, and more will increase in production for yourself. The least tortured man on the Day of Judgment is underneath whose feet will be placed 2 live coals. And this is again talking about Abu Talib. He's not in the fire. His feet will be placed on top of hot coals, and the heat of those coals will pass through and boil the rest of his body to this extent that his brain will be boiling also. This person who receives this punishment will think that he is the most punished person on that day. Sorry, I don't know what's happened there. Let's go back. So again here we have an idea of knowing, because this person has only ended up in this situation here because of all those things that we've just talked about, not understanding the purpose of creation, not understanding consequence. Among the people, we just talked about this, among the people of hell are those who will be immersed in fire up to their ankles, some up to their knees, and some up to their waists, and some up to their throats. Mankind will stand before Allah, Rabbul Alameen. Some of them will be submerged in their sweat on Yawm al-Qiyamah, up to their ears, up to their waist, up to their knees, etc. Again, this is a standing of khawf, and the Shaykh is bringing these hadith because to instill this idea of consequence. Jannah and hellfire will be shown to me, and were shown to me, the Prophet ﷺ said, and I've never seen the like of this day in good or in evil. If you were to know what I know, you would laugh little and you would weep much. And his companions experienced such sufferings on that day that had no equal. They covered their faces and began to weep. So the Prophet ﷺ was describing Jannah and Jahannam to his companions, and he said, he gave them the description, and after that he said, if you knew what I knew, this is just a description, but had you actually seen what I'd seen, you would laugh little and you would weep a lot. And when the companions heard that, they were covering their faces and weeping. On the day of resurrection, the sun will be above people's heads to the extent of a mile or a meal, and some of the ulama have said meal here refers to a mile, what we consider as a mile. But it can also refer to a meal, which is a stick, which is used to apply kuhl. A meal can also be used for that. The Prophet ﷺ said that on that day people will be submerged in their sweat according to their level of sin. So now what we learn from this is that Yawm al-Qiyamah is going to be a very desperate situation. And that is going to be desperate because people do not have khawf and that consequence in the dunya. Therefore they will feel it on that day, Yawm al-Akhir. And this is a day when even the prophets will have khawf, because in the dunya they have that sense of consequence. So now, just in one surah, Surah Hud, we have the example of Nuh saying to his people, and Shu'aib saying to his people, and the Prophet himself saying to his people about this idea of khawf. In the very beginning of Surah Hud, the Prophet ﷺ said, فَإِنِّي أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ عَذَابَ يَوْمٍ كَبِيرٍ. That he's telling his people, I fear for you, I have got a fear of the consequences of a day that's going to come, because you guys are not fearing that consequence right now. Nuh alayhi salam, and la ta'budu illa Allah, he came to his people telling them to remove shirk. Inni akhafu alaykum adhab yawmin alim. Again, fear. Shu'aib also, وَإِنِّي أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ عَذَابَ يَوْمٍ مُحِيطٍ. Again, a day which is going to be a day which is going to surround you, it's going to envelope you. You're not going to be able to go or run away at all. As this was the sunnah of all the prophets and the messengers, there was no actual life. We can now see this reinforcing what Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, that this has been the sunnah of all the prophets and messengers. All of them came to teach their people the idea of khawf and raja, hope, and muhabbat, love for Allah. It was there in the sunnah of Nuh, and it continued all the way down to the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Sulaiman ad-Darini from the Salaf, he said, a heart which doesn't have khawf, doesn't have fear of Allah, of the consequences, except that his life would be destroyed. Except that his life would be destroyed. Hadith 403, the people will have sweat again on the Day of Judgment, and their perspiration will be 70 cubits down onto earth, and it will reach up to their ears. So that's how deep it is. You know, it will start off very, very deep on, into earth where their feet are. So now, what we learn from this is that people will be standing on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and their height will actually be 70 cubits high. What this hadith is saying is that that sweat will be 70 cubits high, and it will reach up to their ears. What is a cubit then? 1 cubit, the ulama of fiqh now are talking about what is a cubit, dhira, is 62 centimeters roughly. So half a meter roughly. So on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and when people will enter Jannah, your station, your height on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and when we enter Jannah, bi'idhnillah, Allah make us of them, and not the people of the fire, will be 70 cubits, so that's 70 times 62. Your height will be 43 meters. That's how tall you will be on the Day of Judgment, and that's how tall you will be when you enter Jannah, bi'idhnillah. Why is this? Ibrahim and Sufyan from the Salaf also said, if khawf is removed from the heart of desires, the heat of desires will spread it. Desires have a passion. Desires have a lust. Desires come with an element of heat. So when that khawf is your shield. When khawf is dropped, then that heat will spread around your body. And when that heat spreads around your body, then it will spread like wildfire, and the love for the dunya will become attached with those desires. How can you reverse it? It will become very, very difficult for a person to reverse. How do we remain upon the correct path? How do we gain khawf? And how can we remain on that path of khawf? Some of these hadith now. 404, Abu Hurairah was saying that we were in the company of the Prophet ﷺ when we had a loud bang. A huge bang, as in that we've never heard this kind of a bang before. Thereupon the Prophet ﷺ asked us, do you know what that sound was? Obviously they were inquiring themselves. So they said, Allah and His Messenger know better. So the Prophet ﷺ said that is a stone which was thrown into the hellfire 70 years ago, and it has only reached the bottom just now. After 70 years of travel, perhaps at light speed, and now it's only just now reached the bottom. Another one from the Salaf, Nun, he said, a person will remain steadfast upon the correct way as long as he has khawf. We can connect these two. Again, it's about consequences, it's about knowing where you want to end up. If you want to end up in this sort of a situation here, 403, 404, then there will be no khawf, there will be no consequence. But if you are aware that this is going to be the situation of some people, and most people from mankind, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, you will try and find the correct path of khawf and remain steadfast upon it. Dhunnun from the Salaf, he said, a person will remain steadfast upon the correct path as long as he has khawf. If he understands what khawf is and he's implementing it correctly. If khawf is removed from him, he will deviate and he will become misguided. Hadith 405, every one of you will speak to his Lord without there being an interpreter. Allah will have a conversation with every single one of us. He will look to his right and he will only see deeds that he's previously done. He will look to his left and he will see that his deeds are previously done. He will look on his good side and he will look on his bad side. Now he's having a conversation with Allah. And he will see everything that is there and he will see everything that is there. And there are other narrations where Allah will say, is there anything here that you deny? Is there anything that we've added which is incorrect? Is there something that is missing? And I'll say, La wallah, there's nothing. I admit to absolutely everything. And he will only see what is previous, and he will look in front of him and he will only see the hellfire before his face. So protect yourselves, and the Prophet ﷺ now is saying here that he is speaking to Allah. The right will be there and the left will be there, and in front of him will be presented the hellfire. Before you get to that situation, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, have khawf. Seek that consequence and save yourself from the hellfire, even if it is giving in sadaqah for half a date. And if you don't have half a date, another narration, then good manners, good speech. 406, I see what you do not see and I hear what you do not hear. Heavens has squeaked. And this is a hadith where some of the ulama have said it is weak. But the Prophet ﷺ is saying here that I can see and I can hear what you do not see. The skies are squeaking and they have every right for it to squeak. The Prophet ﷺ is saying here, the reason why it squeaks, because there is not a place of 4 fingers except there is an angel worshipping Allah, either making ruku' or sujood. And by Allah, if you knew what I knew, you would laugh little and you would weep much. The angels themselves realize that there's going to be a Yawm al-Qiyamah. Some of those angels have been created from the time that they've been created until Yawm al-Qiyamah just to make ruku', and they've never moved from ruku', and they will never move from ruku'. Some of them just in sujood. Some of them have been assigned with certain jobs and they have that level of khawf because they know that there's going to be a Yawm al-Akhir. And the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that these are much more stronger than you. And if there's anybody that's going to be able to hack the hellfire and the heat and the intensity and the depth of it, then it's the angels. But look at the fear that they have. 407. Man's feet will not move on Yawm al-Qiyamah before he's asked about his life and what he did in it, about the knowledge that he gained and what he did with it, the wealth and how he earned it and how he disposed of it, and about his body and what he did with it. Khawf. Khawf with 4 things. Your lifespan, the hujjah that has come to you, the knowledge that has come to you. This is a proof now for you or against you. Do you know that you have to wake up in the morning to pray? Do you know that you have to pray in midday and then in the late afternoon, in the evening? Do you know that these things are there? Do you know that Allah has sent us a word which is uncreated? And this is the only thing that is uncreated in the universe. But yes, we leave it in our phones, we leave it as an app on our phones, we leave it on our shelves. We know that we're supposed to recite it, we know that we're supposed to learn from it. The Prophet ﷺ is telling us, on that day, you will be asked about everything that you know and what you did with that knowledge. Your wealth and how you attained it and how you spent it. And again, this is all reinforcing the point of worship. All of this is worship. Your body is worship. How you use your body is worship. How you use your wealth is worship. 408, the day, or that day, the earth will reveal its news. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, as Allah says in Surah Zalzalah, it will speak. Allah will allow the earth that we are speaking and sitting on right now to actually speak. And it will make a testimony either for you or against you. Then the Prophet ﷺ inquired, do you know what it will say? And they said, Allah and His Messenger knows best. He said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, its news is that it will bear witness against every slave, man or woman, as to what they did. And it will say, on my back, you did this and you did that. And I couldn't do anything, but today I'm complaining against Allah. That's the news. فَيَوْمَئِذٍ تُحَدِّثُ أَخْبَارَهَا. That's the khabar that the earth will give on Yawm al-Qiyamah. 409. The Prophet ﷺ said, how can I feel ease? How can I go and enjoy my dinner? How can I go and enjoy my sleeping? How can I enjoy my football match? How can I enjoy my phone and my clothes and my cars? The Prophet ﷺ said, there's not one aspect in the dunya that I can enjoy. You know why? Because I have been told of an angel who has a trumpet on his lips. And ever since he has been created, his eyes are fixed at the Arsh of Rahman, waiting for the command. And he's never blinked. And this is the reason why he has been created, to blow into the trumpet twice. And he's waiting for that order. And his eyes are fixed at the Arsh, waiting for that order. He, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, perceived as if this had shocked his companions. When he said this, the companions were shook. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam told them to seek comfort through reciting, Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil. Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient as an agent, is sufficient as a trust for us. We have tawakkul in Him and He will help us. But that help has to come, that tawakkul has to come with love, has to come with khawf, has to come with submission, has to come with hope. These 5 components, they come with one another. Look what the Prophet ﷺ is telling us. Have khawf of the Yawm al-Akhir, have khawf for the consequences for your actions and your negligence and our sins and our lack of worship, but also have tawakkul. 4:10, he who is afraid of the pillage of the enemy sets out in the early part of the day. So he fears now the enemy is going to attack him. So what he does is he goes and sets out before his enemy comes to him. And he reaches his destination. And then he says, be on guard that the commodity of Allah is precious. The Prophet ﷺ is saying, be on guard that the sila'atullahi hiya ghaliyah. That the thing that Allah is trying to trade you with is something which is very, very important and very, very precious. What Allah wants to trade with you with is Jannah. So the parable that we're learning here now is the Prophet ﷺ is saying that you know that an army is coming towards you. What's that army? The hereafter. That is coming towards you at speed. Instead of letting it come to you and it takes you by shock, you go towards that enemy and prepare to meet him. And now the Prophet ﷺ is telling us this is how you can gain that trade with Allah. The people, 4:11, the people will be assembled on the day of judgment, barefooted, naked and uncircumcised. And I said, O Messenger of Allah, Aisha, will the men and women be able to look at each other? They'll be naked on that day. The Prophet ﷺ said, O Aisha, the matter will be too serious for them to look at one another on that day. The level of khawf on that day. Why is there so much emphasis on punishment? Why is there so much emphasis on Yawm al-Akhir? Why is there so much emphasis on the unseen? And I think probably we'll conclude with this point here, which is that khawf is connected to the unseen. Your level of consciousness and realizing that your actions has a consequence, you see that because you're working towards the akhirah. That's one point. But there's also another bit delicate point that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned. And this, bi'idhnillah, should be sufficient, I hope, for all of us. Take this away at least. Look at the hikmah and the effect of khawf in a person. When the effect of khawf in a person is there, this is how he's able to contemplate and explain to us so that we can gain some of that. He said, rahimahullah, if a person fears Allah in the dunya, then he will not have fear of Allah in the akhirah. It's not possible that a person has fear in two stations of his life. Either he has fear in the dunya and in the akhirah there is no fear. Or he has no fear in the dunya and the akhirah will be full of fear. So it depends what situation that you want to be in. And we ask Allah to give us tawfiq, to make us of those who fear Him and have fulfilled His rights to the best of our ability, and that He takes us in a situation that He is happy with us and not angered. هذا والله أعلم وصلى اللهم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Shall we carry on? I didn't ask. I perceive that people are a bit tired. جزاك الله خير. بارك الله فيكم. خير إن شاء الله. I plan to that we carry on because hope is